Hello, friends, and welcome to the Reclamation podcast. I'm your host, Megan Colleen Johnson, and I'm here to guide us in raw conversations about thriving in life and work, so that together we can step into personal agency and stop letting life happen to us. We'll cover topics like health, boundaries, communication, finances, and worthiness. That badass business you've been dreaming of, it's not so far off. The desire to wake up feeling fully alive, it's right around the corner. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Reclamation podcast. I am so honored to have you joining me today. I'm really excited about who I have on with me, which I'll introduce her in just a moment. And today I'm recording from my office as I normally do. It's a beautiful sunny day outside, which I'm really grateful for. And I've got some coffee in front of me. I'm pretty chill today in my leggings and just like a sweater because self-quarantine is real. So that's kind of where I'm coming from today. And today I have with me Michelle Morales, MS, a coach and creator of Dance Warriors, a program dedicated to empowering women through the art of dance. She uses her intuitive abilities and extensive knowledge in psychology and dance to guide women back home to their truest selves and dance their way to self-love. Through her one-on-one coaching, she guides women to step into their power, overcome their challenges, and become their own shero. She spends her days helping children with their emotional and academic needs as a school psychologist. So today we're going to be diving into overcoming challenges and becoming your own dance warrior. And I'm just so honored to have Michelle. She and I have known each other for almost a year now.
Yes.
And yeah, it's just really an honor to have you. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you. It's an honor too. It's an honor.
It's just so fun. I love being able to know each other kind of on a personal growth sense and then kind of bring it into our actual work, which is really cool.
I know this is amazing, especially because we've seen each other grow and step into our own purpose and power. And yeah, it's very inspiring and just meaningful to be here. So thank you. I love and respect your work.
Well, same back. I love it. And I'm so excited to share with everyone else because what you do is amazing. So I'd love for you to just kind of share where you're recording from, what you have in front of you, kind of set the stage of where you're at right now.
So I am recording from LA and I am currently sitting on my couch. I have my computer to the right of me. I am on this podcast with you through my phone. I have my notepad and I'm feeling pretty relaxed in this self-quarantine. I think I have adjusted, or I'm more than likely just feeling more adjusted to our new normal for the next few weeks. I've had my coffee already. I wake up pretty early, so I'm feeling good and just ready to dive in and explore this interview with you.
Yeah. I'm realizing that it is kind of funny that I have coffee still because it's like 1:30 in the afternoon and, you know, just like living that slow quarantine life over here. Oh, that's so great. I love it.
Amazing. Yeah. Enjoy.
So, yeah, it's good coffee. So I'd love for you to share, what is your story? How did you start? I know a lot of your story because, again, we've journeyed together through some this past year. But what did you really have to reclaim to step into the life and the work that you're doing right now?
What did I really have to reclaim? Myself, just myself, my core values, my beliefs, my interests. You know, when people ask me, what do you have to do to really feel comfortable in your body? And I usually respond with, you have to have the courage to be yourself. You know, and that's a scary process because of our conditioning. Our conditioning has led us to disconnect from ourselves, and to come back home to yourself means that you have to have the courage to look in the mirror and look at the parts of yourself that you are more than likely feeling out of integrity with. And sometimes, and that brings grief. not even sometimes, that brings grief and loss.
Mm-hmm.
And in order for you to feel like you belong to yourself and feel loved and worthy, you have to go through that grief. There's no escaping that sense of grief and loss and having to make tough decisions on what's in your environment, the things that your bias beliefs that hold you back from connecting and loving people that are different from you. Yeah. So it's a tough road because of our conditioning, but it's so worth it when we're talking about bringing more love and consciousness and making this world a better place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially right now. So we're recording, it's March 21st, and I'm planning to release this in a couple weeks. But right now we're kind of just a few days into self-quarantine and just kind of what this virus is bringing up and stirring up in people. And it is like so key. And I feel like it's so important right now to notice how the world is almost echoing back to us this message of coming back to yourself and hearing your voice and allowing the emotions that come with it. Because, you know, we're starting to get into like the new routines of, you know, what self-quarantine looks like, or a number of us are. And I feel like even for me this past week, I've had to process so many emotions. You know, there's just so much you have to work through. You're seeing other people struggle. There's, you know, facing your own struggles and all of those different pieces.
Yeah.
So this like deep inner work is so relevant to what we're seeing in the world. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially when you have trauma. It's a different ball game for us, because aside from like allowing to feel your emotions, it feels very scary. And then when you come from poverty like myself, when you have trauma growing up or feeling overwhelmed, and you know your nervous system gets overwhelmed and flooded. And when you're a leader or a healer with a voice, you can feel challenged, because this is a time to come together and then also go inward, you know? So being in that space in the both and is so important right now, and acknowledging our human experience, that there is panic and there is anxiety. And I find what's interesting right now is the systems that we grew up in usually teach us to reject our emotions, right? And now it's interesting to see also how much of that is also coming up, where it's like, you know, don't panic, don't feel anxiety. And it's like, no, boo, this is a real threat. You know, this is a real threat, and we're going to panic. And I think it's a matter of, well, what are we going to do with that panic? You know, how do you adjust when you're out of integrity, maybe buying more than what you need to on toilet paper? You know, how do you? It's like, how do you flow with it and even forgive yourself? Because we're talking about survival here. You know, it's interesting. But yeah, being in the both and is beautiful, because this is definitely encouraging us to do that.
Totally. So I love where our conversation is going today. I feel like it's going to take a little bit of a different structure than some other podcast episodes. And I'd love to dive into some of this, because I feel like this is what we're working on right now. Like there's so many things that we have reclaimed in the past. There's so many stories that we've had to work through. And now in this phase, what we're like in right now, we're having to process what we're going through now. But like you were talking about, like the old traumas as well. So I'd love to like talk through some of that, because I think that more often than not, it can also be easy to overlook the things that are coming up. And so when we do, you know, want to go out and buy excessive amounts of toilet paper, we don't recognize like the root cause of what may be bringing that up, and just honoring that and allowing it so we can show up with integrity.
Yeah.
And so I would love to kind of dive into that a little bit more. I guess I'd love to share like an example you had just mentioned, and I feel like this is something I've been working on as well, is currently I am in a place where I feel, or I am secure and safe, and we have enough like financial provision and I'm okay. But like you were saying, like my story included a season in my life when I was young, when we lived in campers for a little while and we hopped from camper to camper, parked in people's yards. We didn't have a lot of money. And I remember those feelings have been coming up for me. And immediately I shift into, I need to figure out how to make money. I need to figure out how to do this.
Yeah.
I need, like those different triggers and like the fight or flight mode. And I'm having to ground back in and recognize and just honor and be like, you know what? No, like I am safe. I am grounded. I am okay. And I can allow myself to feel the feelings, but ground back in. And then I can show up with more integrity to serve people from that place. And I'm curious, like, what have you been noticing, and like what feelings are coming up for you, or what have you been kind of noticing with people around you?
It's been tough because I'm also in a privileged position where I have my own apartment. I have food. I have the means to at least be okay for the next month or two. And I also have a family where, even though they're sovereign over their own selves, in my family, I somehow have been in the position where like I'm like the go-to person. That role was given to me very early on, intentionally or unintentionally. I'm sure it has to do with our cultural values, given that this is something that's common in the Latin community. But it also, being in America, has been tough because there's a belief of individualism, right? And so having to be where, yes, it's about uplifting our community, and then you're also being programmed to believe that, no, it's about you and only you, brought a lot of pressure. And not having a father growing up and just feeling alone. So I often felt alone and overwhelmed, but I also I had to grow up fast. Regardless, I didn't have an option. I had to survive and grow up. So that, in terms of that, has came up of like, this is where my panic attack came from, right? Because the go-to person, my mom was sick. She was in and out of the hospital a month before all of this 2 weeks before all of this went down. So I was like, oh my God, can I be the one that affects her? How am I going to support her? How am I going to be the go-to person here? And at the same time, feeling flooded and overwhelmed by this idea of everything's falling on me. So I kind of went inward, and that's where my panic attack came from. But also in terms of poverty, like actually a lot of moments as a child where I didn't even know where I was going to have my next meal. There were a lot of moments where, I lived in the midst of in an environment with violence in and outside of the home. I grew up in the project. So having the fear of going back to that and feeling no control over my environment, because though I know that as a whole, from like the human race or the human experience, we all have struggles, right? Of like feeling like we're going to run out of food, or at some point, some of us struggle to make ends meet. And then at the same time, for colored people, is the experience and the trauma is way much worse. And that's hard to sit with, because we have to sit with the idea of, oh shit, this has happened. This is going to happen again. When we see who's being impacted is marginalized communities. So feeling a sense of, even though I'm in this position of having my own apartment, I'm still that margin, like I'm still that kid. That's still my reality. So how can I be in this space right now of, being of service, and then also holding and being compassionate with my younger self, who at one point didn't even have a meal, or had to depend on community for food. So there's a sense, when we think of community, that's actually a lot of times how I was able to eat. So I trust that our community will stick together and will support each other no matter what. And, to surrender to that to embrace that, like, actually, we've always been good. Yes, we've struggled. It's been unfair for us. Not always been good. I don't want to underestimate our struggle and our pain, because it's been pretty significant. But at the same time, we've been able to overcome, and we are resilient. And just for me in this moment, remembering that, like, shit, if I lose my apartment, if I have to lose myself, put myself in a storage, like, this is like my reality. Like, I'll be good. I have a community, like that sense of, instead of, and yeah, going into panic. But when I've gone into panic, that was like my biggest fear. But it's like, oh, this is familiar. Like, we're resilient. We've done it before. We got each other, and this is where we're like really sticking together and helping each other out online. Sometimes it's very overwhelming. So I can't tap into all the groups that I'm a part of that have supported my journey. But again, I trust our journey. I trust our community. I trust that that we're remembering who we are in this very moment because of what's happening and how our community is actually being affected. So that's where I stand with that. That's what's coming up for me. And that's why for me, it's been that much more vital to like really go inward and hold my inner children, because that's been scary, like holy. And then, like I said, it's like going back to that memory of like this little girl feeling alone, seeing how my mom was affected and seeing how we struggle with money and feeling helpless. Like, all of that came up for me, and I panicked. I cried. I was like, this is real. And then I dropped in more and more and more to hold myself and know that we got this. And even like, yeah. So that's been my experience. And when it comes to trauma, I know that everyone has their own experience with trauma, and it's worse for people with trauma, so we have to be extra mindful on the spiritual bypassing that's happening right now. Any type of bypassing that's happening, we have to be extra mindful of that, to believe what our body's communicating, because people with trauma tend to dissociate when we're in danger. We tend to leave our bodies. So that's where even my panic attack came from, because there's a lot of talk on social media of like, don't be on the low vibrational scale or level, or, raise up your this. And I'm like, that sounds great, boo. But right now, this is a real threat. And this is my lived experience is communicating something else to me. So I'm going to disconnect and actually listen to my inner children because this is where I feel like, man, all the work that I've done has been worth it, because I'm not feeling desperate, like I see the impact, the anxiety, and then I'm like, oh, here's where I can like go inward and actually practice the natural tools that are coming up for me. So that's what I'm grateful for.
Yeah.
I said a lot.
I love it. No, it's also good. I feel like I need to like unravel what you said and kind of go back and touch on some things. It was so good. So a couple things that you said pretty recently is, first of all, I would love you to share kind of what is your definition of trauma. Trauma's come up in a few recent episodes of the podcast, which I really love because I think we all actually carry more trauma than we realize. So my definition of trauma is just anything that we have felt unprepared to handle.
Yeah. So, because I know that, so my definition of trauma would be that something that's distressing and disturbing to our experience. So there's like little t trauma, right? And that sounds like maybe what you're discussing, and correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. And then there's a big T of like, we're talking about neglect, abuse, physical and emotional. We're talking about sexual abuse, and those are the type of traumas. And even like living in poverty, being in an environment with violence, that's a big T trauma. And I'm probably not even, I don't know if I'm using those terms correctly right now, but yeah. So that, and when we talk about in general terms, everyone has their own level of big T, little t trauma. So my trauma is more on the big T trauma, like the traumatic experience of neglect, of a sense of like deep abandonment because having no dad, and then abuse, being exposed to child abuse at home, being exposed to violence. Also, that's generational trauma for me, domestic violence, witnessing even suicide when I was little. For me, these experiences have really shaped me and have kept me on survival mode for most of my life. So that's why when something like this hits, this is not something that I can take lightly, and that I have to pay extra attention to how my body's responding and tune into my sensations. Because when you experience a level of trauma that I have experienced in life, we tend to dissociate and we tend to leave our bodies and we tend to numb ourselves because we had to grow up and to survive when we were young, when I was young. I don't know what I'm saying. You know what I mean? So that's like the difference that I always have to be mindful of when I dive into personal development courses, when I'm learning from anyone. And this is why I advocate for always going with your own lived experience of things, because everyone has their different experiences. And at the same time, there's some serious, distressing, disturbing experiences, trauma that we've been exposed to, that it just, the world looks different for us, the world just looks like a threat. So to not only work through our programming, right, to also work through our trauma is that much harder. So it's been quite the journey because I've had to unravel both. And even with that said, diving into and unraveling and coming back home has also dysregulated me. So I've had to really support myself through therapy and movement and learn what works for me, and really pay attention to not bypassing myself because of my trauma, because people like us are also conditioned through our systems to look at ourselves as defective, deeply unworthy, unlovable, because you have depression and anxiety that's a result of something that you had no control over. So it's like a whole beast. It's a whole beast.
I love it. So I love what you shared so much, because I think you're the first person I've talked to about trauma who has actually, like, you're actually a psychologist. So I love hearing those definitions, because I think no matter who I'm talking to, I feel like often we don't give credit to the trauma we may have experienced. And especially in moments like in the world right now, a lot of people may be experiencing these difficulties, these extra difficulties of trauma, like of being someone who has come from trauma, but not have ever given credit to the trauma.
Right.
And so I love hearing kind of your experience and what that has looked like, because then for anyone who's listening, if this is your experience as well, that's likely why. And you can give yourself so much grace.
So much grace.
Yes. Yeah. And that's so important. I know my husband and I were actually talking yesterday, because my experience has been kind of similar to what you were talking through, where like all of these things are coming up, and I had to kind of explain kind of where I was coming from for him, because the past year or so has been relatively normal.
Yeah.
And like when we first got married, I had to process a lot of trauma, but then we kind of got into like a little bit of more of a normalcy. And now with this coming up, it's like, oh, okay, wait a second. No, I'm responding in this way because I'm processing all these things. This is why my experience is a little bit different for yours in these moments. And if you're not coming from a place of trauma, it's also really, really great to hear this, I feel like, because it can also give you the opportunity to give grace to someone who may be processing trauma. And especially right now, I think giving each other grace is such a huge part of this whole experience. Like globally, giving ourselves space to be human
Yes.
is like this thread that I feel like is coming through where like we've pushed ourselves so hard. We do bypass a lot in our day to day. We're hustling, we're moving, especially in like the Western American culture that we're coming from right now. Like we're encouraged to bypass everything.
Everything.
And so this is just causing us to have to come face to face with our humanity in a way that many people haven't their entire lives.
Yes.
So,
yes. And noticing our different responses and respecting our different, like our different lived experiences, right? And I think that that's what social media bypasses, you know, when I'm seeing, and like, I love that we're all doing our best and supporting each other, giving us tips and everything. But also, as I'm talking to different people, like even you right now and my friends, everyone has a different reason for their anxiety and panic.
Yeah.
Everyone, even their family members, like this toilet paper and the hoarding. It's hard for me. I can't even judge it. Like, it scares me because, of course, it's going to affect me. And I'm not judging it because it's a real fear. And everyone, I mean, we even have religion playing a role in this, you know, like, is this the rapture? Is this apocalypse? Like the apocalypse? Like, these are real fears that believes that people believe. So, or even like the conspiracies, you know? So it's like, everyone has their own different trauma that's coming up, and
they're the stories that we're attaching to everything.
Yeah, let's just have grace and really just love on each other and be compassionate, because everyone truly has a different experience. Even as you and I are talking, where I'm like, okay, even being a difference, right? You're white, Afro-Latina. Like, even as I'm talking, I'm also being very mindful of, how do I say this in a way that honors your humanity and also honors mine, right? Like, in that both ands, like, and that takes self-awareness of like, it matters. Our humanity matters. And then how can I also bring some more awareness of like, what is it also like for people of color that are truly struggling too, but even at a deeper generational trauma level, you know? And I know we all have, even in your lineage, you have your own generational trauma, and how can we be with each other in this moment and show grace and be compassionate without dismissing both of our experiences, you know? And that's what I'm finding that's happening right now, where I'm like, okay, yes. And how can we still love on each other in this moment right now, you know?
Yeah. I would love for you to dive into that a little bit more, specifically around marginalized communities, and people who have come from marginalized communities or are in a marginalized community or currently in poverty as well. If you have thoughts kind of around that, because I know as a collective, it is so important to honor all of the journeys that are, you know, each of us, we all have a different journey. And I have just noticed so much tunnel vision as well. And I would love for this to be a space where we can kind of peel back some of that and open up, like, why is it so important that we self-quarantine? Why is it so important that we hold grace for all of these different perspectives? And if you have just like thoughts on that. I know with your work as well, like you work as a school psychologist, so you've seen a lot of kids having to deal with this. So how can we help and like hold space for each other when we come from different journeys? I'm just kind of going in circles right now. Also, I just think like I'm trying to give grace to myself because my brain has been like so spiky. I feel like just all these different directions this week. So I don't have a question, but I would just love for you to speak to all of the things I just talked about.
You know, this has been, in terms of speaking of marginalized communities with my white friends, and you may have to edit this, but let's go for it. Yeah. Has been a sensitive topic for me because I'm still learning. I'm still learning. And I'm still waking up to the deep-rooted effects that white supremacy, capitalism, patriarchal classism, all this all these terrible systems have had on my community. Mm-hmm. So I've had pending conversations because I've had beautiful friendships with you, with Madison, even in our group of Rising Sovereign. It's primarily a white space, and I've had great connections. And I've had to also step back to also see how to see myself, because I feel like the standard growing up, it is to be white, right? So the tools that we've learned have been oppressive to us because the standard is to be white or to be light so that you can have access. So in these spaces, it has been difficult for me to, not even difficult, it's been a point for me to move away so that I can start listening inward and also start embracing my culture because I've been conditioned not to. So that's why I haven't unraveled or talked about this with any of like my white friends, because I feel like I'm still navigating and learning, and it brings a lot of pain and a lot of rage that I had since I was little. And to unravel with a white person is definitely something that is out there. And I, like Desiree Ottaway, James Olivia, Ash Johns, like these are people that have really dived into the work and have a lot of knowledge around this topic. And then I'm like in the beginning stages of like the way that I'm protecting my community is to not unravel with a white person in public right now, because I don't want to unintentionally perpetuate more harm or bypass my community. And I also don't want to harm you. I don't want to say something that's going to bypass your humanity in this very moment as I'm navigating and unraveling, if that makes any sense. So that's been like tricky, not even tricky. That's just like kind of like what I've chosen, because I am all about love and compassion. And that's actually one of my greatest strengths is love. And so I'm trying to make sure that that's how I stay with an integrity with humanity at this moment. I know, and also because there's certain like things that come up, where it's like microaggressions that could come up that I might be not seeing because I'm still unraveling. And if like, let's say if this were to go public, then I have like one of my sisters who's either probably more aware or has a different experience with microaggressions that's going to be like, whoa, like, and that's what I don't want yet. This still feels like unsafe in that way, if that makes any sense. Because I want to, there's like Olivia, there's Madison, so right now the way that I'm doing it is by having private conversations, because there's no judgment in that either. Yeah. For me, this is the way that I'm healing, is even this conversation that I'm having with you is healing. And I have a good friend of mine, Haley. We have these conversations, and then I get to go back and think, oh, that was a microaggression, but she doesn't know. I just came out. How can I bring this up with love and compassion? And what I care about is that whoever I am talking to, like yourself and my friends, is that there's care enough and compassion enough to look within yourself for your internalized way, your internalized oppression, in the way, your awareness on white supremacy. And like, I feel like it's so sensitive that, unraveling in public at this stage of where I'm at might be dangerous, for my well-being and for the well-being of my community. So, that's where I stand with that in this moment. And I don't even mind this going public, but in terms of like, how can I get you as an ally, or how can we still, because that's also the what I'm hearing. I still don't fully understand that concept yet, or have sat with it yet enough to understand what I will be asking of you as my white friend.
Yeah. I get that. I just want to like take a moment and honor everything that you just said, because it's really like, there's so much to process. So much when you dive into the issues of white supremacy and
Right.
Oppression, and seeing how you're showing up for yourself and your community is really, I don't know, I just want to honor it because it is very inspiring. And the way that you are showing up for yourself in that, in honoring your experience and knowing like, okay, this is what I feel safe with right now, and this is what I don't feel safe with right now, is really, really cool to see that. And so I just want to honor that and say, I love how you approach that. Something that I've kind of been noticing in this like season with this virus, all of these systems of oppression, white supremacy, like women's rights, like the patriarchy, all of these things. And I'm still kind of processing. It's like, it's so in our face. And to me, it almost feels like in order to heal from this, so many egos have to die. Like, it's like all of these ego-driven systems, in order for us to heal, like they're just becoming so prominent. And we have to strip it back so we can kind of come back to that core. And even if it's in the moment saying, you know what, I feel safe just being able to just kind of notice that it's there and notice that these things have to be unraveled. And like, we don't have to dive deep into those stories right now. Like, I think that's something that I keep reminding myself, even in my own process, is like, I don't have to dive into all the stories right now, but noticing that the system is here and at least trying to kind of pull away that top layer heals so much. It's a start. It's somewhere we can keep moving forward. And I feel like I've just been noticing how we're all being called in different ways to kind of be able to start stripping away some of those ego entities that we each have within us with our various, like wherever we're at, whatever level we're at. I'm still kind of processing that. You can probably hear that in my voice as I'm kind of like, this is all of the stuff I'm processing and I'm trying to put it into words, but
there's a lot. And how do we even approach our ego with love and compassion?
Yes.
Right? Because our ego is not bad.
Yeah.
And that's something that I've learned recently through my coach, Lisa Fabrega. She, like, I was like, oh, duh, we do need our ego. So how can we embrace all of who we are and approach it with curiosity, with integrity, with love? Because then when you can see that from those lens, and that's hard, again, if you have a lot of trauma, if you can see it from those lens, and it allows you to look at the possibility, right? Where it's never that black and white.
Yeah.
It's usually gray. And how do you sit in that contradiction? How do you sit with the both and? How do you, like, this idea that there's one answer for what we're experiencing is false. So how do we flow with it with grace? And that's like in everything, right? Even like in our whole experience. This is why conversation and why I love James Olivia, because it's about having a conversation and navigating it and having the courage to witness yourself and ask yourself hard questions on what you're up to in the moment of having this conversation. What are you trying to get out of? There's just so much juiciness in all of this. But we have to be willing to have conversations, be uncomfortable, and have grace in those moments, because we're so afraid of emotion. We're so afraid of experiencing uncomfortable feelings, which is also a part of our system. So bringing some humanity in our experiences is so key. But just really knowing how to be in the contradiction and the both and has been where the work has been for me. With this self-quarantine, at work as a school psychologist, as a woman of color, dealing with bullies at work that are leading. How can I noticed, and this is an example, I noticed that when it doesn't mean that I don't go through this. Like at first, like when I was confronted with the first bully leading for principal, I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Like I panicked because it was to me re-traumatizing to see because I grew up in violence and witnessing child abuse and being abused myself in terms of neglect and witnessing physical abuse. For me, any type of like screaming or yelling or harming of human beings, like just puts me on, it scares the shit out of me. Yeah. And what I go numb, I kind of freeze in the moment. So for me, what has helped, and this is why I feel like I'm so all about love and compassion without bypassing our experience, is that, at first I'm probably going to go home, talk a lot of smack, or just really even dehumanize, right? Like label the principal of how terrible she's doing, blah, blah. And then I have to like, how do I bring it back and then choose love? Like if I can see her from those lens of like what's actually happening, once I choose compassion and love, then it allows me to have the difficult conversation of like, listen, you're out of line here. But if I'm dehumanizing her, if I'm in panic mode, anxious and approaching her, then it doesn't create connection, and it makes it hard for her to even hear what I'm saying. Yeah. And for me, what was important is there's more at stake here, right? So for us right now with the self-quarantine, there's more at stake here.
Yeah.
You know, so if we're going to talk to someone who's stealing all the toilet paper, how can we approach that from a place of compassion and understanding, like, this is fucking scary right now. I see why you're doing that. Can I have some toilet paper, please? Because I'm also needing some.
Yes. Wow. There's like a lot to this conversation. Yes. Gosh. I just feel like I'm like in multiple levels. I'm like, yes, this is great. And then other times I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to sit with this. And like, there's some work I need to do here. And like all of it. I love it. It's so good. I think ultimately I'm just noticing this thread of like humanity and like really allowing all of our humanity. And I do want to transition because we've been chatting for quite a while in all of these various directions. Oh yeah. Kind of the primary topic that comes to mind as well is like with allowing all of our humanity and having compassion for all of our humanity, we do still have to take ownership for our experience. I would love for you to share a little bit more about what that looks like as you run your Dance Warriors program. And then if you have just like 3 empowering tips as far as how we back in our homes can literally like back in our houses can learn to step into becoming our own dance warrior, becoming the warrior and the shiro of our own life. So first of all, just share a little bit about Dance Warriors and like what that looks like, and then just like those 3 empowering tips.
Yes, Dance Warriors. Okay, so I founded Dance Warriors almost 2 years ago. And it's really about, so let me start with saying that the reason why I started it was because of the positive effect that dance had in my life, it continues to have in my life. And aside from giving me access to joy and self-expression and liberation and love, it held up a mirror for me and showed me some very deep-rooted, unhealed parts of myself that I am thankful that I was able to catch and witness and get curious about and navigate through using dance as a tool. And really, it came from, wanting to feel confident. I am talented in dance. I grew up with dance. It's a part of my lineage, and performing is also a part of the way that we celebrate dance and cultivate joy and just express ourselves in my culture. I'm Guatemalan and Jamaican, and my mom raised me dancing. She's the one that put me out to perform at the age of 5. So this is something that comes natural, right? So I was curious that I wasn't feeling confident on stage. and I didn't know why. So I went on this mission to figure out, how can I look like the women that inspire me when I see them dancing, right? There was a bunch of women not a bunch, but a few that really expressed themselves on the dance floor, on stage. And I was like, and what caught my eye was that I started taking on stories and following the rules on how to do a step and how to do this. And much like our programming, right? Like I follow the rules and I'm still disconnected and feeling less confident than ever. Like, it's just like, this is not making sense. And that's where I got curious. And this is, when people ask me, what do I have to do to feel confident in myself? It's like, you have to be willing to be yourself. You have to see yourself and your movement as worthy of being seen.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
And that's why I created Dance Warriors, because I struggled so much with myself. I learned very young to hate myself, to hate my skin color. I learned very young to see myself as defective. Aside from being Black and Latina, everything in my world communicated, you're not enough, you're not worthy, you're not deserving, you're unlovable. So that's what dance did for me, where I'm like, oh, this is why I can't feel confident. This is why I can't stand being seen by people. I can't even look at myself. I can't even, I don't even want to break the rules, because then that means I'm unlovable. I have to follow what people say. So this whole being in dance, in a dance community with other women, just brought up, like we're going through right now, in my face, capitalism, patriarchal systems, and how all of this oppression, how all of this really affected my freedom of self-expression. So that's what Dance Warriors is about. And that's what I made it about. It's really about liberation. It's really about dismantling and deconstructing the ways that we've been taught to oppress ourselves, and also bring awareness to how we've been taught to relate to others in such a destructive and unhealthy way that creates this connection between us. So that's why I've made it a community and a team, because being that I also have background in behavior analysis, I'm always about, how can we learn in our natural setting, right? There's courses and online and this and that, but when you're in the moment, how can I, as a facilitator, as a lead of this group, bring awareness to what's happening with the concepts that I teach around relating to others from a place of love, relating to yourself from a place of love? How can I bring that in the heat of the moment? How can I bring uncomfortable conversations and make it a safe space to unravel and create more connection? So that's what Dance Warriors is about. And then we get to learn a routine in the midst of it, because when you're learning a choreography, when you're in community with other women, so much comes up. So for me, it's about teaching the concept. We dive into the belief system. We dive into self-love and body liberation and body wisdom and so much stuff. And then we get to apply it, especially when we have our performance season, when we're getting ready for our actual showcase. So much comes up that this is where we get to come back to those concepts and see them live, in us. So that's what Dance Warriors is about. I use my intuitive abilities. I'm very intuitive in tapping into what's happening in the room. And I've had to also make sure that I'm holding myself and supporting myself, because that can dysregulate me as well. I motivated by everyone's response to me, to the group, to show up better every single time. So it's work for me, because I'm in it. It's beautiful work for me, because I'm in it with them. I'm also learning and becoming a better leader and facilitator as I'm unraveling with them, as they're responding to me and responding to each other. So that's Dance Warriors. So to me, it's about
love it.
liberation.
It's so good. And I can't wait till one day you can make it into an online platform as well. So people across the country can also take it.
Yeah, that's actually what I plan on doing, especially with this self-quarantining stuff going on. It's really having me, that's my plan. My plan is to make this big, and not because I want to be big, but really because I'm here to inspire the masses. I feel like that's what my calling is. It's always been. I've known that since I was little. And my company will inspire so many people around the world. And I want to travel and perform and talk about, how to relate to ourselves and others from a place of love, use movement to heal. It's going to be big, and it's baby steps, but I'm getting there.
Yeah. Oof, that's awesome. I love how you're speaking that out, like just so confidently too. I love it. So good. So
Thank
good.
You.
So
3 tips.
Yes, 3 tips.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. That's why I was just going to circle back. So what are 3 things that we can be taking home with us? Again, like literally in our homes right now, what are 3 things that we can be doing to liberate ourselves from the systems that we are noticing and to step into our power and step back into really our bodies as well?
Well, yeah. So right now, I think the first step is always awareness. So right now we're spending a lot of time with family, right? So, I mean, just because we're in a crisis, in this global crisis, doesn't mean that, our problems and the way that we relate to each other, how can I say this? It doesn't go away. We still have our differences. So it matters that in this moment right now, while we're all self-quarantining, that we're taking the time to slow down and allowing ourselves to witness how we're responding to stress, how we are relating to ourselves and others in this moment of stress and crisis, and how can we bring love and compassion without bypassing ourselves and our human experience and our needs and our desires. And I feel like anything that comes up, like challenges, arguments, to use these moments. So first tip, awareness. Second tip, to use your challenges as a catalyst for growth, as a catalyst to implement more love and compassion and understand yourself, to be with an integrity, to guide yourself back home. And again, just bring more love and grace to the situation. A lot of us run away from conflict. So right now that we're in each other's faces, it's probably a great time to maybe step back and like really see how you can honor yourself and the other human being in front of you in this whole situation. Yeah. And my third tip, I already said, choose love and compassion. Slow down. Yeah. And there's quite a bit that we can go into, but this is like pretty much like my go-to right now is to believe yourself, believe your body, believe your lived experience. Don't even think that just because we're feeling fear and panic for whatever reason we're having, it doesn't mean that the world is witnessing that or feeling that. Literally every person that I've talked to has a different reason why they're panicking or having anxiety around this. And our experience, our individualized experience, as well as our collective experience, it matters. So it matters that we, my answer is not your answer.
Stay curious with each other. Because that's a really, really good point is that it's really easy to assume that a lot of people are feeling the same way that we are when, like you said, we're all in such different places, and just being aware of that and noticing that and coming back to yourself to process what you need to, but bringing that into conversations to just being like, okay, I don't know where they're coming from right now. How can I just show up and be curious and show up as my best self, but then also just have compassion for whatever they're experiencing as well.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's so good.
Yes.
So good. All right. Awesome. So I've got a couple wrap-up questions.
Sure.
I feel like we've talked about some of this already, but what is one way that you slow down amidst our busy world? We're kind of all forced to tackle this one, but what do you like to do when we're being called to slow down right now?
I just listen to my natural inclination to slow down. If that makes any sense, and I notice it through my resistance. So if I'm doing too much, my body will let me know. And that's when I listen. If I have a headache, if, I'm feeling overwhelmed or flooded, my way of slowing down is to tune in and pay attention to what I'm naturally interested in, like intuitively. If it's a nap, if it's dance, if it's just laying down and Netflixing and chilling, if it's, those, just listening and not comparing myself to somebody else's needs or desires or their tips. I feel like it's very empowering to be able to believe yourself and what you want and to slow down.
Yeah.
Just, and not looking like externally always, look first within yourself before you look outward.
Yeah, definitely. I wanted you to really quick, you've mentioned it a couple times, and just because I don't know where everyone in my audience is coming from, can you briefly give a synopsis of what flooding is?
Flooding is kind of like when you feel overwhelmed by everything, right? And it freezes you and you feel like paralyzed because you just feel like all this information that's being given to you and you can't even process. And I'm just describing it. I'm not even giving you a definition, but that's what flooding feels like for me. It's like a sense of overwhelm. And then the impact that it can have is overwhelm, but also a dysregulation in your system, even feeling scattered or desperate because you're so overwhelmed by the information or the everything is coming at you at once. So
perfect.
That helps.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Good.
And then who are a couple of your current role models? I know throughout our chat, you've mentioned a few, but I'd love if you can kind of share some of those people again.
Yeah, I love this question because I always want to start off with my models and my mindset expanders always are my clients, my loved ones, the people closest to me. That's where I get my inspiration to expand and to look within to see how I can be in integrity with whenever, especially if a conflict comes up. And that's usually when I get re-inspired, is through my clients and through my loved ones. It's like, how can I show up better for them? How can I show up better for myself? And that usually takes me inward. If I can show up for myself, if I can heal or sit with and show love and grace for myself, then I can do that for my clients. I can do that for my loved ones. So humanity is really also my mindset expanders, my models, and even seeing in my community, like yourself and the people that I admire that I mentioned before, and I'll mention a few more. When I see my sisters, when I see you guys show up, then I want to show up, when it's a natural motivator for me when I see that you guys are expanding and pushing your limits and stepping outside of your comfort zone and having difficult conversations. So that one was the tricky one because I was like, yeah, I can sit here and name Oprah, or like unusual, but it's really us. I'm even inspired by my own self, really, to be honest. I'm like, I'm my own mindset expander and model. Because sometimes
That's so good.
Yeah.
I love that because it is like, we do pretty incredible things. Like you, at one point you were talking about resiliency and we are extremely resilient. And when we can notice that about our own stories and be our own mindset expander as well, there's something almost deeply stirring in that I love that. That's really cool.
Yeah, I love showing up for myself, especially when you come from a place where you were neglected, and you feel alone. And when you know that you can hold yourself, that is powerful. So for me, when I have these conversations, when I show up I'm just like, I'm a badass,
Yeah.
And then I'm just like, that's how but a few that I do want to.
That's good.
A few that I do want to name, and this is in no particular order, but as I said, I did mention James Olivia, I mentioned Lisa Fabrega, Christine Gutierrez, Desiree Adaway, Elizabeth Dialto, Rocio Navarro, who does water, who heals through water. Madison, of course, our coach. Ana Flores, she's the founder of We All Grow Latina. Linda Garcia. And I said Sean's, right?
Yeah, earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, and these are just a few, but these are the people in my immediate environment that I go to, that I intentionally dive into their work and allow myself to either be held or guided by them. Yeah, they inspire me to keep on this road of personal development and just uplifting our community. So, yeah.
That's awesome. We'll have to get some of those links from you.
Yes.
The names.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, these are all people that are doing powerful things in the world, that remind me, that hold up a powerful mirror for me that I need to continue to express my soul's purpose and lean into the work and be of service to others. And, so.
Yeah. Good stuff. So then also, how can we find and support you online?
Awesome. So Instagram, usually that's where I post, share my story, my dance videos, any updates or anything like that. I do it on social media, and that's at MI Morales, Morales 09. That's my IG handle. And then I also have a website where I have my blog and a little bit about me, and where I also post updates on dance warriors and stuff like that. And that's at michelle-morales.com. And that's pretty much where you can find me. I'm also on Facebook, but for the most part, I post a lot on IG. I'm trying to go into Twitter, but we'll see.
Yeah, it's hard to kind of expand into all. Yeah, it's a lot to do all these different places. But and I will have those links in the show notes as well, so you can access those at megscolleen.com. And I highly recommend following you on Instagram, because I love watching your dance videos. They're always so inspirational. I'm always like, oh, like I want to move now. I want to do something. They're so good. I love it. They always make me smile.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much for being here with me today and for diving into all of this stuff. I know it takes a lot of energy, especially right now, to kind of dive into this for like an hour of time. So I really appreciate that, and appreciate the energy you brought to this. So
yes, thank you for having me. It's been an honor.
Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Reclamation Podcast. I hope it served you on your own reclamation journey, and know that I'm rooting for you all the way. If you want to learn more about the show guests, head to the website, thereclamationpodcast.com. And if you found value in the show, 5 stars is always appreciated. Good things are coming for you. Bye for now.